One of the highlights of this year's Melbourne Documentary Film Festival is a film called Dwarf Story-Little People-Big Choice. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the director of that film, Riccardo Servini. Riccardo, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Congratulations on this film because I learned so much about dwarfism and also about a treatment or treatments for it. Tell me about the origins of the documentary for you, how it all came about.
I was working at a company in London, a documentary film company called Salon Pictures at the time. I was working in their development team, and they were known for, quite big documentaries like about Alexander McQueen, Audrey Hepburn, those type of things. And they'd been developing this project for a while with a few other people in various different like versions of the story, I guess. And it was because it's such a complicated subject matter. They were like, what, not sure which direction to go in and stuff like that. And then eventually, they started talking to me about it, and I kind of gave them my take. I'd done a film on disability, but a feature documentary called A Space in Time, and I'd done quite a lot of work in the world of disability and accessibility. So I kind of just put my take on this thing and wanted to make sure it was a film that was coming from multiple angles. And they kind of bought into my take, and yeah, we went when I made the film.
Ah, how very interesting. And how much production support, etc., did you have behind you to be able to make this quite extensive documentary?
Yeah, the budget wasn't huge. We shot in the UK, the US, and Australia.
Yep.
So I came over to Melbourne for the first time. I hadn't been before. Um, and there's a lot of costs to traveling all the way across the other side of the planet. And yeah, it wasn't. We had to balance the budget. So one of the ways we did that was I was pretty much the only person that traveled. So we used local crews, which actually turned out to be really exciting and a better decision actually, because it was great to work with crews in the local spaces and people that knew the areas, and it made things a lot easier.
Oh, very interesting to hear that. Now, there are such interesting little people in the film. I always worry about how to say it without being offensive or anything like that.
No, yeah, we kind of settled on that term, little people, after talking to a lot of people in the thing. Some people still don't prefer that, but there isn't one. I mean, person with dwarfism is probably the kind of over, like, you can't really deny that one. It's a scientific kind of, fact. But little people is fine.
Okay, so tell me, you've got some great subjects in the film. How did you find them? And it looks like many of them were very willing to tell their stories and to talk quite openly to you for the film.
Yeah, so first off, I have to thank Malcolm Newham and Henry Farrington, who were part of the development team early on, and they found a lot of the subjects, including Aidan, who's our main American subject, and Ravi, the scientist that we speak to in Melbourne. Um, and then there were a lot of people we spoke to. We had probably about 10 subjects in the development stage, and with people we were talking to. But as you know from watching the film, it's a very controversial subject. So
Mm,
quite a few people did drop out, especially from the, I guess, pro-drug side of the argument, um, for various reasons. I'm not going to force anyone to tell me their story.
mm,
And then some of the people we actually met while filming. So I met Sarah, who's our young protagonist in Australia, when I was filming with Ravi. She's one of his patients. She happened to be there on the day we were filming, and I spoke to her father and her and said, "Look, this is what we're doing. Would you like to be involved?" And yeah, they were happy to tell their story, which is also a very unique one and a unique experience with the drug. And then our UK subject, Casey and Roxanne, we found later in the process, and they were wonderful. They added a whole other dimension of, because the drug isn't readily available in the UK. It was nice to talk to a family here and them also almost discovering the drug while we're talking to them and them kind of thinking about it. And we revisit them, a month later when they had learned about this thing. And then we kind of recontextualize, okay, what does this mean?
Yeah, very interesting. And we hear so much about the issues that little people have in terms of access to a whole range of things, including simple things like driving and all that sort of thing. So I'm glad you explored that because I found that so interesting.
It's a hugely important part of the subject. I think people know people have dwarfism. It's a very rare condition. I think there's only 600,000 people on the planet, identify as having dwarfism. And as you see in the film, there's 771 different types. It's actually said of dwarfism, and but this drug only affects one type. So achondroplasia. So that's one type of a lot of different types, and it's important because that type is 80%, I think, of people with dwarfism. So it is a very large amount of people. But I think it is so important to show the world of people with dwarfism and get their opinions from all sides because yeah, you know people have dwarfism, but you don't really think about the social model of disability and them living in a world that's not made for them. So it's not an accessible world for people with disabilities, including dwarfism. So yeah, there's only so many times I can show someone not being able to reach something, um, but it's important to at least see it.
Yes, exactly. I was also wondering as I was watching your film, which is really quite incredible, about the predisposition, genetically or whatever, to dwarfism and whether that can be controlled in any sort of way or, just that genetic scientific sort of aspect of it.
That's a complicated question. Probably a better question for Ravi than me. Um, Look, I think that wasn't too much of a discussion I wanted
Mm,
to get into because this is what causes the controversy. They're creating this drug to help with function, right? That's the purpose of the drug. It's to help people who, like I say, live in a world that's not accessible for them, function in it in a more easier way. One of the ways they do that is this drug helps add a few more inches to their limbs, adds a bit more reach to their lives, and stuff like that. That's what the purpose of this thing is, and I think if you it becomes more complicated if you start diving in further of okay, what can it
mm.
do to stop dwarfism? If I understood your question
Yeah,
correctly.
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, so but that's what part of the thing because people in the community are like, oh, why are they trying to wipe out dwarfism?
Mm,
My journey on this film, it's a complicated question. I don't think some of the scientists or doctors are trying to wipe out dwarfism. Are there people probably looking for a cure or trying to wipe out whether it's dwarfism or, Down syndrome, all these things? I mean, I read stuff every day about this stuff, and of course, there's people doing that for various reasons. I personally uh, had to take a step back as a filmmaker and let people give their own opinions on that. I don't
sure.
have dwarfism. Um, and that's, I hope, what the film has done.
Yep. Look, absolutely. No, I just wanted to ask that question because it was just going through my mind as I was watching
Oh,
your
for
film.
sure. It's an
Yeah,
important question.
sure. And the other aspect is the issue of the medical interventions, whether drug treatment or surgery or doing
Hmm.
nothing is
Yeah,
the better option. I mean, there's lots of ethical issues there.
100%. I mean, Aiden was an important character in this story because one, he's been on the drug, he's chosen to come off the drug, and he says some things in the film that maybe shock people. I would rather have surgery than take a drug that's going to change me. I think that's quite a big statement.
Mm,
But everyone's entitled to their own choices and how they want to live their lives. And it doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks in that regard. But I think, we could have done a whole entire section on surgery as well. There's so many things we could have dived into, but there's only so much you can do in 80 minutes.
sure.
Um, But there's people out there that have taken lengthening surgery themselves just to try and like fit into a world that's not created for them, and that's their choice. But I think the tough, yeah. What's my final point on that? I think that's my final point. What was the initial question again?
Oh, just about the surgery versus the versus drug treatment versus doing
Yeah.
nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone's got a different choice, right? And I
Yeah.
think I think the hard thing as well is with these drugs when they're at early stages, you don't know the repercussions, right? And I think that is a scary thing for a lot of people, and it
Mm,
is a bit of a risk to do this. And you've got subjects in the film who've had amazing results, and subjects in the film who have had maybe results they weren't happy with and wanted to stop, and subjects in the film who are completely opposed to any kind of change, you know?
sure. No, I absolutely understand. I mean, I'm not looking for a definitive answer. I'm just
Yeah, no,
exploring
it's
the
hard.
topic.
It activates my thinking as well because I'm thinking about it all the time still, and just like thinking, yeah, it's always hard for me to speak for the other people's decisions, and I hope the film kind of just lets us see that everyone makes their own choices, you know?
Of course, absolutely understand. And I like the way you've incorporated archival footage, music, and the way you've structured the film. So obviously you've made some very careful decisions about your approach.
Yeah, archive is was an it's a tough one. That's another budget thing as well.
Hmm.
There's lots of archive you want to include, but archive is very expensive.
Yep.
Um, our production team were amazing, and our archive team were amazing to be able to help us license certain things to help us tell this story, which is a very complicated, nuanced thing. And I
Mm,
think it's important. We wanted to include some of the media and how they treat this subject matter, which is also probably one of the biggest problems because when the media gets a hold of it, they say, "Oh, it's a cure. Oh, it's a get-tool drug." And unfortunately, so do certain pharmaceutical companies. Like, careful what I say, but
yeah.
they sometimes will present this as a positive, like, hey, look, make your kid taller. And sometimes the wording that media uses is quite inflammatory. And I think people need to tread a bit more lightly. Words are powerful, and you need to be really careful how you approach these things. So Archive was great. Music, I had an amazing composer, a friend of mine called Tom Robson. It's very hard because you don't want to overdo it with music and something like this. You just kind
Mm,
of want it to help you along with the narrative and
yeah.
pick those emotional moments. We didn't try to make an overly emotional film. That was a very conscious decision. My last film was very emotional, but I didn't want this one to be led by emotion. I wanted it to be led by information.
Okay. No, fair enough. And I mean, speaking of media and the unfortunate depiction of the situation and others, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the 1930s film Freaks, which is just, I mean, looked at today, you think that's just awful. It's offensive. It's nasty. But of course, it inhabited a time period in the 30s when the word freaks was, I suppose, a common term for anyone with dwarfism or any other sort of situation like that. So it's so important with a film like yours to address that and to obviously question it and to look at alternative ways of looking at people who are different.
And that comes down to language again. I think it's very important. There's an M word that people use for people with dwarfism, and I think that's an offensive word. But while I was making this and talking to average height people, some people just thought it was a scientific term, you know? And I'm not going to use it now, but I think people
No.
know what I mean by the M word.
Yep.
They don't have a Google, and you can find out. But
Yep.
I think that's an important thing for documentaries like this to do is educate and like we started this conversation, people don't know what terms to use or
Mm.
what's offensive and stuff like that. And it is a complicated because some people think some things are offensive and some people think they don't. So you're kind of looking for balance, but all you can do is educate yourself, talk to people with dwarfism, and have those conversations. But at the end of the day, everyone should just be referred to as their name, right? So it's
Absolutely.
just
That's
a
a
condition at the end of the day.
It's a condition. A great comment though. It's about the humanity and the name, not about the condition they're in. So, Ricardo, tell me. Obviously, you then had lots of material. Tell me about the editing process, because that's always quite a
Mm.
challenge.
Editing process was interesting. So we did this with a broadcaster over here called ITV. They were kind of main funding for the film, and the initial thing was to make a feature for them. And then while I was literally standing in 90-degree heat in Alabama filming a scene, I get a phone call saying they want it to be a broadcast hour, which is 46 minutes essentially. We pushed back and said we wanted to do a feature as well, but out of my hands, I was told, okay, you have to now make a feature and a 46-minute version that fits various different criterias. That's a tough thing because it is a nuanced thing, like I say, and you want to let the science play out. You want to let explanation play out. You want people's thoughts to not just be bam, 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 bam. You want breathing moments. So that's what I tried to do with the feature version was find a pacing where, you're taking in a lot of information and hopefully, and you're moving around the world a lot. That's a tough thing to balance. Like,
Mm,
oh, suddenly we're in America with Aiden, suddenly we're in Melbourne with Sarah, and now we're in the UK. That's a hard balance to get to make sure the audience aren't getting confused or thing. And I hope we found that balance. You have to be careful with how many subjects you have in multi characters in these projects. So the editing process was hard. It probably took me 6 months, I think, of various drafts. My first cut was 3 hours.
oh,
So, you dig into it and you have to really hone in on the points because, like I say, there's so many different points you can make. And I think when I've made two films and two feature documentaries in the space of disability now, and both times I've been like, wow, I could just make a whole film just about accessibility easily. So it's always quite hard to just kind of like kill your darlings almost.
mm. I understand that, and so many filmmakers say the same thing. Kill your darlings is so difficult. So, no, that's fair enough. So, tell me, how have the subjects of your documentary, I assume they've all seen the film, how have they responded?
It's been really positive, actually. It's a nerve-wracking thing when you're making very personal projects and you're hoping to represent each person correctly and that they're happy. And so that's always probably the hardest part for me is showing my subjects what they've done. But thankfully, I've had very, very lovely emails. I think also we haven't really touched on it, but the parents is a very complicated subject as well. And I
Uh,
think you can that was my scariest thing, how I represent the parents and their decisions. Because yeah, it's a thing for kids, so a lot of the decision comes down to the parents.
yeah.
And thankfully, they've given me positive feedback, and hopefully, I don't see why they would lie. If they were annoyed, I'm sure they would tell me.
Mm.
Ravi was happy. He thinks the science has been represented correctly, and him and everyone seems to be happy with how they've been represented. I haven't spoke to every single subject, to some of the people that are only in it briefly. I haven't spoken to about the film, but
Yeah,
the
yeah.
main core people all seem happy and represented.
Okay, excellent to hear. Well, I think they should be because you beautifully represented them and discussed the issues without it being a sort of didactic or piece which falls into one category or another or makes an opinion or whatever. I think that's great.
Thank you.
Um, and apart from screening at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival, I gather that Dwarf Story has screened elsewhere, other film festivals, other places.
Yeah, we've had a good little festival run. We've won awards all around the world. So
Mm,
we initially screened in the UK at a festival called Little Venice, which was amazing, where we won 3 awards, including the Disability Experience, which kind of meant a lot to me,
mm,
to be awarded something like that. Hopefully, I'm representing people, like we say, in a way that they're happy with. And we've screened where we screened. We screened in Turkey, in Europe. We've screened in Holland. We've screened in America. and we've got more screenings coming up in America and the UK. We're screening in South Africa, which is a fun one. I've never
Mm.
been there. Yeah, we screened all over Europe. It's been, I think we've won like 15 awards so far on the festival circuit, and it seems to be resonating. It's a tough film for festivals, actually. I found the thing because it's a very informative film, and I think you kind of want to really focus and get the information. I sometimes don't know if those are. I think people maybe expect more cinematic films sometimes at festivals and stuff like that. So it's a yeah. I don't want to call it like a TV documentary, but it has that feel to it because it's of the broadcaster that, funded it.
Yeah, yeah, no, I understand. But there's always an issue between form and function and story and so on. And I mean, this tells a really powerful story in many respects that I found, great, excellent documentary, and I'm so glad you've won those awards. That's highly deserved.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Ricardo, I'm intrigued. What are you working on next?
Ooh. So how come I'm working on two projects right now that I'm under NDA on, but yeah, there's details I can do. So I'm trying to do something quite different next. So I'm working on a true crime series at the moment.
Uh,
Uh, and so, like I said, I've done two things in the disability world. And I kind of wanted my third long form project to not be in the same space. Not that I don't want to do any more in that space, just I
mm,
want to see what else there is to do. And so we're working on something an online grooming and abduction. So it's a very tough, dark subject matter, but we
mm,
found a very interesting angle to it. And I've just launched my own, well, in the process of launching my own company focused on impact documentaries, and finding various ways to reach larger audiences, because I think that's the big thing we want with these types of projects is how do we reach larger audiences and educate and change thinking a little, because that's always my aim with these things. You're not going to like a film can open conversations, right? I don't think it's going to have the ability to make a giant change to a world that is unfortunately
mm,
in a very messed up place. But I think disability as an example, working with people with disabilities, often I work with people in wheelchairs. And I don't know if you probably don't have this as much in Melbourne, but in the UK, we have these things called Lime bikes, which are these bikes that you can rent and just ride around
yep,
on. And unfortunately, in London, they're quite a lot just littered on the streets.
yep,
So often you just find them across pavements. So little things like I walk down the street, I see a bike, I'm going to pick it up because I'm aware now if someone in a wheelchair comes along, they're
mm,
probably not going to be able to do that. And they might have to ride into the road and it could be quite dangerous.
yep,
But accessibility helps everyone. That might be a parent with a pram. And that's what drives me to tell those stories because it's those little changes in thinking. I think if everyone can have that, it makes the world a better place. And I know that wasn't your question, but
fine.
it's the spin back round is like, okay, now I'm doing a true crime series. How do we use that genre, which reaches a lot of people, to actually educate as well and get people to think? So we're doing online grooming. How do we help parents
Mm,
in that situation where they feel like their kid might be being groomed online, and what happens if your child unfortunately does get abducted? What can you do? So that was my way of getting back to your your question.
yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. No, I appreciate your comments and your reflections and so on. It was great. Well, we've been speaking to Riccardo Servini, the director of Dwarf Story, Little People, Big Choice, screening as part of the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival. Riccardo, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Pleasure talking to you too, Pia. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye.